Welcome back to another episode of Mind Liberty. I'm your host, Gus, and today we're diving deep into one of the most fascinating geopolitical and economic stories of our time. The unexpected resilience of Russia's economy despite facing sanctions and the pressures of war. Now, I know what you're thinking. How is that even possible? With the scale of sanctions imposed by the West and the immense costs of a prolonged conflict, how could Russia's economy be doing anything other than spiraling into chaos? Well, by the end of this video, you'll understand the economic moves that have allowed Russia to not only survive, but to actually thrive in some ways during a time when many predicted its downfall. We're talking strategic partnerships, clever financial maneuvers, and even the role of cryptocurrency, which is something you don't hear about much in mainstream media. So, if you've ever been curious about how one of the most sanctioned nations in modern history manages to keep its engine running, buckle up. This is going to be an eye-opening ride. First off, let's get something straight. This isn't a discussion about military strategies or battlefield tactics. That's a different conversation. Instead, we're focusing on the dollars and cents, the economy. This is about how Russia's economy is still functioning, and in some cases performing better than expected, despite the war and Western sanctions. You'd think that with so much global pressure, cutting off access to foreign markets, and the targeting of key industries, Russia would be on the brink of financial collapse. But that hasn't happened. In fact, the Russian economy is defying expectations, and it's a development that has caught many by surprise, from analysts to governments around the world. And the first piece of that puzzle? Reserves. Russia has always been a resource-rich country, with one of the largest supplies of natural resources on the planet, from oil to gold. And here's where it gets interesting. Even with sanctions aimed at destabilizing its financial system, Russia's gold reserves and international currency reserves have stayed relatively stable. They've actually increased slightly since 2024, helping Russia keep its economy afloat. These reserves act as a cushion, a safety net, allowing the government to maintain liquidity and keep critical operations going, even as it becomes more isolated from Western financial systems. But how is that possible? Why hasn't there been a total collapse in confidence in Russia's currency and economy? The answer lies in strategic planning. Long before sanctions even began, Russia had been preparing for a situation like this. The country started shifting its economic focus away from the West, building stronger ties with nations that aren't necessarily aligned with Western powers. This brings us to a key factor in Russia's economic resilience: its trading partnerships with countries. While Europe and the United States have shut their doors, other major economies have stayed open for business. These countries represent massive markets, and in some cases, their demand for Russian oil, gas, and other resources has only increased as they seek cheaper alternatives. Now let's talk numbers for a second. Russia's GDP is growing at an annual rate of about 4%. Think about that for a moment. 4% growth in the middle of a war, under some of the most severe sanctions the world has ever seen. This is significant because back in 2022, most Western analysts predicted a sharp economic collapse, thinking that Russia would run out of money to fund its military campaign or provide basic services. But instead of shrinking, their economy is growing, and this growth is projected to continue, with estimates that Russia will see more than 3% GDP growth in 2024. So, how are they pulling this off? One of the key elements has been the diversification of their trading partners and the types of deals they've been able to strike with those partners. Take, for example, oil exports. While European countries have loudly declared their intention to wean themselves off Russian oil, in practice many continue to buy it, often through intermediaries. Russia has developed what some are calling a shadow fleet of oil tankers. These ships transport oil through a complex web of intermediaries and middlemen, making it hard to trace the true origin of the oil. In fact, as of 2023, Russia had moved over 123 million barrels of oil this way, completely bypassing the sanctions that were supposed to cripple its ability to export. And here's the kicker. Even though Europe is trying to cut off its energy dependence on Russia, it turns out they haven't been able to fully kick the habit. Countries like Germany, Italy, and France have been finding indirect ways to import Russian gas, and the demand for Russian energy isn't going away anytime soon. This exposes a fundamental hypocrisy in the sanctions regime. Publicly, European leaders talk about isolating Russia economically, but behind closed doors, they're still very much dependent on Russian energy to keep their economies running. But it's not just about oil and gas. Russia has been able to maintain its export strength in other critical areas too. Trade with Brazil, for example, reached $11 billion in 2023, with much of that coming from oil diesel exports. Brazil, along with India and China, has helped to fill the gap left by Western markets, ensuring that Russia's economy doesn't go under. Now, one of the more surprising factors in Russia's economic strategy has been the increasing use of cryptocurrencies. When Western financial sanctions kicked in, they effectively cut Russia off from the traditional global banking system. SWIFT transfers were blocked, and major Russian banks were frozen out of many markets. But Russia pivoted to something that wasn't as easily controlled by the West: cryptocurrency. Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other cryptocurrencies have become vital tools for international payments, especially when it comes to doing business with countries like China and India that don't want to get caught up in the web of Western sanctions. It's been reported that some Russian businesses are conducting their international trade entirely in Bitcoin, bypassing traditional banking systems altogether. This is a major development because it signals a shift in how countries might handle sanctions in the future. If crypto continues to play a role in international trade, it could undermine the effectiveness of traditional financial sanctions. This is something that the United States and its allies will have to keep a close eye on, especially as digital currencies become more widely accepted around the world. Another critical element in Russia's economic playbook has been the management of its cure. In the early days of the war, there was a sharp decline in the ruble's value, which raised alarm bells globally. Many expected that the currency would continue to lose value, leading to hyperinflation and a collapse of Russia's economy. But that didn't happen. Russia's central bank stepped in and took aggressive measures to stabilize the currency. Interest rates were adjusted, capital controls were put in place, and the government limited the amount of foreign currency that could be bought and These moves helped prevent a total collapse and have kept the ruble relatively stable, despite continued sanctions and economic pressure. What's interesting is that while the ruble has depreciated somewhat, it hasn't spiraled out of control. Russia's central bank has been able to manage the situation and keep inflation in check, which is critical for maintaining public confidence in the economy. Without this, the story could have been very different. But let's step back for a second and look at the bigger picture here. What we're seeing is a country that has been able to bend, but not break under tremendous economic pressure. It's a testament to the power of preparation, resource management, and strategic alliances. Russia's ability to maintain economic stability, continue exporting oil, and manage its currency shows that sanctions alone aren't enough to bring a country like Russia to its knees. And this brings us to a critical question. Have Western sanctions been as effective as they were intended to be? While they have certainly made life harder for many Russians and created obstacles for the government, they haven't caused the kind of economic collapse that was predicted at the beginning of the war. In fact, in some ways, sanctions have even backfired. The high prices of oil and gas on the global market, partly a result of the war itself, have allowed Russia to rake in more revenue than expected. So while the West is trying to starve Russia's economy, Russia is still making money hand over fist from its energy exports. Now, I know that might sound counterintuitive, but here's the thing. While Europe is reducing its dependence on Russian oil and gas, other countries are stepping in to fill the gap. And because global oil prices have remained high, Russia is still able to sell its energy at a premium, even if it's through more indirect channels. It's a delicate balancing act, but so far it seems to be working for them. So where does this leave us? What does the future hold for Russia's economy? And how should we in the United States view this situation? One thing is clear, the Russian economy isn't going away anytime soon. Despite the sanctions, despite the isolation, and despite the war, Russia has found ways to keep its economic engine running. And as long as countries like China, India, and Brazil continue to trade with Russia, it will be able to weather the storm. But that doesn't mean everything is smooth sailing. There are still plenty of challenges ahead for Russia, especially when it comes to longer-term growth and innovation. The sanctions have cut off Russia from critical technologies and investment, which could hamper its ability to develop its economy in the future. There's also the issue of brain drain, with many skilled workers leaving the country in search of better opportunities elsewhere. These are serious problems that could become more prone. However, for now, Russia has defied the odds. The sanctions haven't had the devastating impact that many in the West expected, and the country's economy is still growing. It's a lesson in resilience, resource management, and the importance of having strong trading partners. If there's one thing we should take away from all of this, it's that the global economy is far more interconnected than many people realize. Cutting off one country from the financial system doesn't necessarily lead to its collapse, especially if that country has the resources and the foresight to find alternative ways to keep its economy afloat. This is a story that's still unfolding, and it's one we'll be keeping a close eye on as we move forward. Thanks for tuning in to Mind Liberty. If you enjoyed today's deep dive into Russia's economic strategy, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of our future episodes. And let me know in the comments below what you think. Are sanctions still an effective tool in today's global economy, or have they lost their bite? I'm Gus, and I'll see you in the next video.